Hey everybody, it's Real Talk with the Pimpcron, and today we are discussing scale creep. You probably know what scale creep is, but in my humblest of opinions, I believe that it is not only a gimmick to sell more miniatures, but it's also somewhat short-sighted. Now, I think they've got a little ways to go, but we'll get into that. So what is scale creep? You probably know what it is. It's from, if you're gauging from the Rogue Trader era Space Marines or Orcs, right? They're practically guardsman scale, and then they got an update like in the 2000s, late 90s, something like that. And they are the Space Marines, the firstborn that we know and love, that scale. And then, of course, we got our Primaris and things like that. Now, Warhammer is not the only game to have scale creep. You might be thinking around, you're like, well, Malifaux doesn't. Age of Sigmar doesn't really have scale creep. We'll see if the new Cities of Sigmar human miniatures are bigger than the old Cities of Sigmar human miniatures. If that's the case, then yes, we have scale creep there. But Age of Sigmar doesn't really have that. What are you thinking about? What other skirmish games like Dust Tactics or something like that? No, they don't have scale creep. But what does is HeroClix, a non-war game. HeroClix has scale creep, and you'd be like, "What are you talking about?" Like they have a difference in the size of their miniatures. They absolutely 100% do. About a year ago or so, HeroClix changed the scale from about 25, 28 millimeter to like 32 millimeter in their miniatures. They are still vaguely compatible with Warhammer, but they're actually getting a bit big. A lot of their regular people are probably Primaris size now. And where they used to be like Space Marine size, they were still bigger than Guardsmen and regular humans, but they were just they were a smaller scale than they are now. Now, I know why HeroClix has done this, and HeroClix is more of a condensed example of what Warhammer is also encountering here. So, if you look at Warhammer and HeroClix, HeroClix sells the same characters time and time and time again. You will have a Spider-Man in practically every single set that comes out, minus maybe like an X-Men set for HeroClix. Obviously, pretty much every single set will have a Captain America, unless it's an X-Men set. You know, most of the main characters, Iron Man, will be in pretty much every set. They've over the years, the 20 years HeroClix has been going on. It's been longer than that, but the current company, NECA, they've owned WizKids for like 20 years or something like that. But just recently, they updated the scale for HeroClix. And you're thinking, why? Why would you do this? Because the miniatures are really just a representation in HeroClix, even more than they are in a normal war game, right? Because HeroClix uses a mat, a gridded mat, and you don't measure with a tape measure. There's no true line of sight, anything like that. Everything is top down. You have to look and see what color coded the squares are, whether it's hindering or blocking terrain or whatever. A solid black line means you can't see through it or move through it. You know, green provides cover, etc., etc. So, HeroClix, you think the size of the miniatures would not matter at all. So why would you do scale creep? Well, you do scale creep because you've sold 75,000 Spider-Mans, and now you're thinking of literally any reason to sell new ones. Like, besides the new cards that come out and the new abilities and all that, you really want people to stop playing with their old Spider-Man or Captain America or whoever. So the best way to do that, and this is just an aesthetic thing, but it really, really works, is that you want to make a new set and go, oh, we're changing the style of it, and you make it bigger. So now it looks kind of silly. If you're playing with the old miniatures and your Spider-Man is the size of, let's say, a teenager now, right? Instead of an adult man. And he's fighting next to, let's say, Jean Grey. And Jean Grey, according to Spider Man's scale, the old scale, you know, she's like 7 feet tall now. It looks weird. And even though they're just representations on a top down gridded mat, it's still just aesthetically not pleasing. And most people are going to agree that having a giant tall woman who's supposed to be average height next to a super short dude that's supposed to be average height just doesn't gel well. So then everybody has to buy the new models so that everybody can have these new bigger. You're going to have to rebuild your X-Men, rebuild your Avengers, your Fantastic Four, your Justice League, all of that, because the old ones just look goofy now. You really can't mix those. And obviously, all the new sets coming out are going to be this larger scale. So, the reason why is to increase sales and get you to stop playing with the old things because the old things are no longer making them money. Does that sound familiar to any of you Warhammer players? It's familiar because look what they did with Space Marines and look what they did with Orcs. So the Orcs and Space Marines have both been updated. They're larger. You see it with the Termagants now. The Termagants are going to start being larger for 10th edition. And they're an overall scale creep. It's funny because it was always a running gag with Warhammer anyway that all the firstborn Space Marines truly could not fit in a Rhino anyway. Like 10 of them, there's no way 10 of them could fit in a Rhino. And now that you've got Primaris, it's funny because their vehicles are not much bigger than the scale of the original ones. So now you're still looking at the Primaris transports, and you're like, well, these Primaris guys still can't fit in these vehicles. Like, they really, if they were really truly doing this for any reason other than to sell new miniatures, then they would have made new transports for the Space Marines, but kept the Firstborn and didn't make Primaris. Sure, they might make new Primaris, like the Aggressors might be a Centurion style unit or something like that, where they're in a bigger suit of armor, okay. But they wouldn't have actually changed the scale. So it's really not the case of, oh, it just looks better, quote unquote, because then they're not making anything more realistic. And in one way, this is really genius because they're not forcing anybody to play Firstborn. They're not forcing anybody to play with the new HeroClix. Not necessarily. But in a passive way, they know most people don't want to play with small, dinky miniatures when there's bigger, more powerful looking versions. I don't know why that is the case, but even I find myself liking Primaris, the look of them, better than the old guys. The old guys look like children now or teenagers. The firstborn. I keep wanting to call them trueborn, the firstborn Marines. So it's kind of genius in a way because they didn't write out Firstborn yet, although I feel like they're slowly transitioning, now that the Primaris have jump people. Well, actually, they don't have jump people, but they do have bikers and they do have assault Marines and they do have these new Primaris Terminators coming out and they've got all these new things coming out. It's only a matter of time, in my opinion, that they're going to get rid of Firstborn. And then, everyone's going to be in an uproar or whatever over it. But honestly, I think we've seen it coming this whole time, right? Ever since Primaris came out, what, 4 years ago, something like that. It is definitely on its way. I think they're going to phase them out. And the reason why is because just like HeroClix, they've sold so many Space Marines over the years. They have to make new Space Marines. They have to make something that will even get the old Space Marine players. Johnny at your club that's been using the same Space Marine since Rogue Trader or at least the 2000s. He's had no reason to buy new Space Marines. He might already have his Legion filled out with 400 Space Marines or whatever, and there's no actual reason for him to buy new ones. But if you make up some ones that are a little bigger, and now the other ones look dinky, well, everyone's gonna want the big ones. It's just human nature. And like I said, it's ingenious in a way because they're not making you buy the new ones, but they're encouraging you just purely through aesthetics that you're going to want to buy the new stuff. And then couple that with the widespread speculation that the firstborn are going to be phased out, and then people are going to go even heavier into the Primaris stuff. Now, the interesting fact about this is that there is a limited range that you can do with this. It really is kind of short sighted because your terrain is only so big. So you can't make like what they're doing right now. The Space Marines were shorter than Terminators, so then they made Primaris Space Marines to be bigger, and they are arguably the same height or taller than the Terminators, which looks weird. So now they're coming out with new Terminators, and sooner or later they're probably going to come out with, oh wait, they already did, new Dreadnoughts that are even bigger. They're making the scale larger and larger, but eventually you're going to be out of the realm of um optics for terrain because terrain is usually 28 millimeters, something like that. And while you do have some room to grow and you can make your miniatures bigger and bigger, like they did with the orcs and the termagant and all that, eventually there is only so tall. What eventually a Space Marine is just going to be an action figure? It's going to be a 6-inch action figure 50 years down the line because they've done a reset of the line several times? No. It is definitely short sighted and it's only like a 1 or 2 time thing you can do it. HeroClix is even worse about that because HeroClix really is a cash grab because their spaces on their dial is only so big for the model. And with this new scale, they actually had to every new model for HeroClix you can tell because they're on this little platform thing. So if you guys know what a trapezoid is, right? It's like a rectangle, but I'm gonna give you a math refresher here. So a trapezoid's like a rectangle, but if you picture the top line of the rectangle shorter than the bottom where the sides come in, I know there's many types of trapezoids. Get off my back about it. But the generic trapezoid, right? Um, that is basically flipped upside down, and that's the little platform they have to put the HeroClix on now because the HeroClix models are really too big for the base. Because HeroClix have printed words and stats and their points and their faction and all that around the edges. So now that they've increased the size of the models, now it's like it's going to be taking up too much space on the base. So now they've had to make this little like quarter-inch platform that all their models are on in order to make it so you can diagonally look at the words underneath the platform. Because the platform is, gosh, 80% of the base now, of the click space. So if that makes any sense to you, HeroClix really cannot do another redesign unless they completely change the size of their bases in the next 10 years to make them even larger. But Warhammer has a little more wiggle room for that. But I do definitely see that as a cash grab more than anything. Of course, as I always say, they're a corporation, they have shareholders they got to pay and all of that. So I get why they're doing it. But I don't think that most people have actually sat down and thought that scale creep is really just a cash grab and it's short sighted. And why would they do this? I really don't think people have thought this through. Now, of course, there are some things, like Beasts of Nurgle are bigger now than they used to be. That's cool compared to like Rogue Trader. That's cool. Obviously, like your Bloodthirsters used to be smaller than a current Demon Prince, and the larger Demon Princes now are larger than the old Demon Princes. So obviously there is some, like a Bloodthirster obviously should be a gigantic model. That does make sense. A Demon Prince should be a pretty decently sized model. That all makes sense. But it's just funny. It is just funny. So if you want to contact me, email me, pimpcron@gmail.com, anything like that, and give me your thoughts on it. But I wonder, did any of you actually think why they increased the scale? And I truly think this is the reason behind it. All right, thank you to GameMat.eu for supporting the show and panhandle.etsy.com. I'm sorry, panhandle3d.etsy.com. And my beautiful, sexy, juicy, dripping, like unreasonably moist. I don't know why they're so slimy, but my Patreon patrons are great people and you should shake their hands. But you probably want to wash your hand after you shake their hands because they are very, just very moist. Anyway, see you next week.